What does a man do when he is treated like a criminal in the very house he built? This isn't a riddle. This is the true story of Dr. Alistair Finch, a titan of aerospace engineering, a man whose quiet genius helped lift a city's dream into the clouds. On a crisp autumn afternoon, he found himself standing in the gleaming terminal of the Finch-Donovan International Airport, an institution bearing his own name. He was just another traveler, a grandfather in a simple hoodie, until a zealous airline manager decided he didn't belong. What followed was a confrontation that would strip away anonymity, shatter a career, and prove that some legacies are not just carved in bronze, they are written in the very soul of a place. The air in the B terminal of Finch-Donovan International Airport hummed with the controlled chaos of modern travel. Sunlight streamed through the colossal floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off the polished terrazzo floors and the sleek metallic fuselages of the jets taxiing on the tarmac. It was a cathedral of movement, a monument to human ingenuity and the desire to connect. For the man standing patiently in the boarding line at gate B12, this place was more than just a transit hub. It was a symphony he had helped compose. Dr. Alistair Finch was 76 years old, but he carried himself with the quiet stillness of a man who had long ago made peace with his own significance. He wore a simple, dark grey hoodie from his alma mater comfortable trousers and well-worn loafers. He could have been anyone's grandfather heading off to visit family. In fact, he was. His granddaughter Maya was graduating with her master's degree in Chicago, and he wouldn't miss it for the world. He preferred to fly coach, to be among the people for whom he had designed this space. He found a certain anonymous pleasure in watching his life's work function as intended seamlessly, efficiently, and for everyone. The airline was Ascend Air, a budget carrier known for its aggressive punctuality and no-frills service. The line moved slowly. Alistair watched the gate agent, a young woman named Chloe, with a harried but professional demeanor, scan tickets and passports with practiced speed. When his turn came, he offered a gentle smile. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice a smooth, calm baritone. He handed her his phone with the boarding pass displayed and his driver's license. Chloe scanned the boarding pass. Beep. She glanced at the license. Alistair Finch. She looked from the photo to his face. The photo was a decade old, his hair darker, his face less lined, but the eyes were the same sharp, intelligent, and kind. She nodded. "Thank you, Dr. Finch. Have a good flight." She was about to hand back his license when a sharp voice cut through the air. "Hold on a moment, Chloe." A man in a crisply tailored but slightly too tight suit strode over from the airline's customer service desk. His name tag read, Garrett Vance, Station Manager. He had the self-important posture of a man who believed his authority was directly proportional to the volume of his voice. He plucked the license from Chloe's hand without looking at her. "Is there a problem?" Alistair asked, his tone even. Garrett Vance held the license up, angling it in the light as if inspecting a counterfeit bill. He squinted at Alistair, his gaze sweeping over the grey hoodie with a flicker of disdain. "This ID is 10 years old," Garrett stated flatly. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Alistair replied. "It's a valid state-issued driver's license. It doesn't expire until next year." "Ascend Air has a strict security policy," Garrett said, puffing his chest out slightly. "We require a current and clear photograph for identity verification. This photograph is dated." Chloe shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the system accepted it, and the name matches the ticket perfectly. The facial features are consistent." Garrett shot her a withering glare that silenced her instantly. He turned his full attention back to Alistair. Company policy is for the station manager to use his discretion in these matters, and my discretion tells me I need more verification. Do you have a second form of photo ID? A passport, perhaps? Alistair felt a familiar weary sigh build in his chest, but he suppressed it. He had faced this kind of scrutiny before, in different forms in different decades. The subtle creeping suspicion that a black man in casual attire couldn't possibly belong in a first-class lounge or a high-end store or apparently a boarding line for a flight he paid for. My passport is at home, I'm afraid. I'm flying domestically, Alistair explained calmly. I don't drive much anymore, so I haven't needed to renew the license photo. I have credit cards, of course. He reached for his wallet. Credit cards don't have photos, Garrett snapped, waving a dismissive hand. Anyone could have stolen your wallet. I need a government-issued photo ID that confirms you are who you say you are today. The passengers behind Alistair were beginning to murmur. A man in a business suit checked his watch with an annoyed huff. A young woman a few feet away subtly angled her phone, its screen dark in their direction. Sir Alistair said, his voice losing none of its calm, but gaining a new hard edge of precision. My name is Alistair Finch. The ticket is in the name of Alistair Finch. This valid driver's license is in the name of Alistair Finch. The address on the license matches the billing address used to purchase the ticket. What exactly is the issue you're trying to resolve? Garrett leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial, condescending hiss. The issue, sir, is that our airline has protocols to prevent fraud. And frankly, something about this situation feels off. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside so we can continue boarding. We can discuss this at the desk, and if you can't provide satisfactory identification, we will be forced to deny you boarding and cancel your ticket. He said the last part with a clear note of satisfaction. For Garrett Vance, this wasn't just about a rule. It was about power. It was about putting someone he had already judged and dismissed firmly in their place. He had no idea that the man he was trying to put in his place had quite literally built the ground on which they were standing. Alistair did not move. He remained perfectly still, a silent, unbreachable rock in the river of impatient travelers. He looked past Garrett Vance, his eyes settling on the massive window that overlooked the airfield. He saw the intricate dance of ground crews, the precise choreography of the baggage carts, the elegant geometry of the taxiways, all systems he had helped design and fund decades ago. Mr. Vance Alistair, said his voice, pulling the manager's attention back from his minor triumph. Are you familiar with the history of this airport? Garrett blinked, thrown by the non sequitur. What does that have to do with anything? I am the station manager for Ascend Air. My concern is with the security and operations of my airline, not a history lesson. But you see, the two are related. Alistair continued, his gaze still fixed on the window. This airport was built on a principle, the principle that a city's gateway should reflect its highest aspirations. It was a massive undertaking, a public-private partnership that many said was impossible. Behind them, the line had completely stalled. People were now openly staring. The young woman with the phone had brought it up higher, the red dot of its recording function now clearly visible. Garrett noticed it, and a flush of anger crept up his neck. This was escalating into a scene. Sir, I'm not going to debate history with you, he said, his voice tight with restrained fury. You are holding up the boarding process for Flight 812 to Chicago. Step aside now or I will call airport security. This was his ace. The threat of men in uniform of official intervention. It usually worked. But Alistair simply turned his head, slowly, his calm eyes finally locking on to Garrett's. The effect was unnerving. It felt as though a statue had just turned to look at him. "Calling security would be well within your rights, I suppose," Alistair said thoughtfully. "But I wonder what you'll tell them. That you are detaining a passenger because you don't approve of his 10-year-old photograph on a valid ID while in violation of your own carrier agreement with the airport authority, which stipulates that any valid, unexpired, government-issued photo ID is acceptable for domestic travel." Garrett's jaw tightened. The passenger knew the specifics of the carrier agreement. That was unusual. It planted a tiny, unwelcome seed of doubt in his mind. He pushed it down. This man was bluffing, trying to intimidate him with jargon. "I am the ultimate authority for Ascend Air at this station," Garrett retorted, leaning heavily on his title. "My judgment supersedes a line in a binder. I have a responsibility to my employer." "And to your passengers," Alistair countered, gesturing slightly to the long, agitated line. "Your responsibility is to get them to their destination safely and on time. A responsibility you are currently failing to meet because of a personal, let's call it a discretionary judgment." The man in the business suit behind Alistair finally spoke up. "For God's sake, man, let him on the plane. He's clearly not a threat. We're all going to miss our connections. Stay out of this, sir." Garrett snapped, his composure beginning to fray. "This is a security matter." "It looks more like harassment to me," another voice called out. It was the woman with the phone. Her voice was clear and steady. Garrett felt a surge of panic mixed with rage. He was losing control. He pointed a trembling finger at Alistair. "That's it. You've been uncooperative and disruptive. Chloe, cancel his ticket. Code it as passenger non-compliance." Chloe looked horrified. "Sir, I don't think... Do it now." Alistair held up a hand, a simple gesture that was surprisingly commanding. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Vance. It's clear we can't resolve this here. I believe you are right. We do need another authority figure to weigh in." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "But it won't be airport security." "Not yet." He then did something completely unexpected. He turned his back on Garrett and the gate and began walking slowly away from the boarding area toward the main concourse. His posture was not one of defeat, but of purpose. It was the walk of a man, heading not away from a problem, but towards a solution. Garrett stared after him momentarily, stunned into inaction. "Where do you think you're going?" he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "You're not checked in. You can't just wander off." Alistair didn't answer. He just kept walking, his gait steady and measured. A wild, paranoid thought flared in Garrett's mind. This man was a plant. A test from corporate. Someone sent to assess his adherence to security protocols. The thought made him bolder. He would show them he was firm, that he didn't back down. He abandoned the gate and stalked after Alistair, his polished shoes clicking angrily on the floor. Chloe was left standing at the podium, her face pale as the remaining passengers began talking all at once, the scene now a full-blown incident. The woman with the phone followed at a discreet distance, her screen still recording the entire bizarre drama as it moved through the terminal. Alistair led his unwitting pursuer away from the bright commercial bustle of the B concourse and toward the grand mezzanine that connected the terminals. This area was quieter, more reverent. It was designed as a space for reflection, a tribute to the airport's origins. The walls were paneled in rich, dark cherry wood, and the lighting was softer, more deliberate. Garrett Vance, still fuming, followed close behind. "You are making a very serious mistake," he hissed, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Evading a security check is a federal offense. I am well within my rights to have you detained." Alistair came to a stop before a vast, impressive wall that dominated the mezzanine. It was constructed of polished black granite, with bronze lettering across the top that read, "The Founders and Benefactors of Finch Donovan International." Below the title were several large, beautifully rendered portraits, cast in bas-relief bronze. They depicted the key figures who had willed the airport into existence: politicians, philanthropists, and engineers. "A mistake," Alistair mused, his back still to Garrett, as he gazed up at the wall. "Yes, a very serious mistake has been made here today, Mr. Vance. But not by me." He turned slowly, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Garrett's agitated state. "Tell me, in your time as station manager here, have you ever taken a moment to look at this wall?" Garrett scoffed, bewildered and infuriated by the question. "I'm a busy man. I don't have time. Sightseeing. What is the point of this?" "The point," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a level of profound gravity, "is that every employee who works in this building, from the janitorial staff to the director herself, should know whose vision they are serving. Look closely, Mr. Vance. Look at the names." Garrett, exasperated, but now also morbidly curious, let his eyes scan the bronze plaques. He saw familiar names from local history: Mayor Abernathy, Governor Prescott. Then his eyes fell upon the two central, most prominent portraits. The names beneath them were larger than the others. The first was General Patrick Donovan. The second right beside it read, Dr. Alistair Finch. Garrett's brain took a moment to process the information. He looked at the name. Finch. He looked back at the airport's name above the display. Finch Donovan. His gaze then darted to the bronze face on the wall. It was a man in his late 40s, his expression one of intense focus and intelligence, glasses perched on his nose, blueprints held in one hand. The jawline, the set of the eyes, the high forehead, they were unmistakable. They were the same features, softened only by the passage of 30 years, as the man standing right in front of him in a grey university hoodie. A sound like rushing air filled Garrett's ears. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly pale sheen under the warm mezzanine lights. His mouth went dry. He looked from the portrait to the man, from the man back to the portrait. His carefully constructed world of rules and authority crumbled into dust. "You..." Garrett stammered, his voice a choked whisper. The word died in his throat. Alistair pointed a single steady finger at the inscription beneath his own portrait. He didn't need to raise his voice. Every word landed like a hammer blow on Garrett's shattered composure. "Read what it says, Mr. Vance." Garrett's trembling eyes struggled to focus on the engraved text. Dr. Alistair Finch, Chief Aerospace Engineer and Chairman of the Founding Committee. His visionary design and unwavering dedication transformed a field of dreams into a gateway to the world. Let this place forever stand as a testament that vision knows no color and progress welcomes all who dare to build. Vision knows no color. The word seemed to mock him, to peel back the layers of his professional bluster and expose the ugly prejudice beneath. The man he had profiled, harassed and threatened to have arrested was not just some random passenger. He was the Finch, the co-creator of the entire multi-billion-dollar complex in which Garrett Vance was, at that moment, a very, very small cog. The woman who had been filming the incident had caught the whole thing. She had zoomed in on Garrett's face as the realization dawned, capturing the precise moment his arrogance curdled into pure, unadulterated horror. She then panned slowly from the bronze plaque to the calm, dignified face of Dr. Finch. It was cinematic. It was damning. Garrett finally understood the full catastrophic scope of his error. He had not just insulted a passenger. He had desecrated a living monument. He had tried to bar the master of the house from entering his own home. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to beg, but no sound came out. All he could do was stare, his world tilting on its axis as the quiet man in the hoodie watched him. His expression not of anger or triumph, but of profound, weary disappointment. The silence on the mezzanine was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the distant, muffled announcements for other flights which now sounded like they were coming from another world. Garrett Vance stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. The phone recording the scene felt like the barrel of a gun pointed at his career. Just then, the sharp, authoritative click of heels on the terrazzo floor announced a new arrival. A woman in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, her silver hair cut in a severe, elegant bob, strode toward them. Her face was etched with a concern that was rapidly hardening into anger. This was Isabel Sterling, the director of the Finch-Donovan International Airport Authority. She was a legend in the industry, known for her sharp intellect and zero-tolerance policy for incompetence. Her eyes immediately found Alistair. The stern lines of her face softened instantly into a look of warmth and deep respect. "Alistair," she said, her voice carrying easily across the space. "I got your text. I came as quickly as I could. Is everything all right?" "What's going on?" Alistair offered her a small, tired smile. "Isabel, thank you for coming. I seem to have encountered a procedural snag with my travel plans." Isabel's gaze shifted from Alistair to the shell-shocked Garrett Vance. She took in his disheveled state, his pale face, and the Ascend Air name tag. Her expression turned to ice. She didn't know the full story yet, but she knew Alistair Finch. He was a man of immense patience and humility. For him to summon her, something had to be egregiously wrong. "This is your station manager?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet, as she looked at Alistair, but gestured toward Garrett. "Mr. Vance." "Yes," Alistair confirmed. He was concerned about the age of my driver's license photograph. Isabel's sharp eyes flicked to the phone, still recording the scene, then back to Garrett. She understood instantly. This wasn't a procedural issue. This was a public relations catastrophe in the making. "Mr. Vance," she said, and her tone was so cold it could have formed frost on the granite wall. Garrett flinched, as if he'd been struck. "Explain yourself. Now!" Garrett finally found his voice, but it was a pathetic, reedy version of his usual confident tone. "Director Sterling, There was a misunderstanding. I was simply following airline protocol. Security. I didn't know." "You didn't know." Isabel cut him off, taking a step closer. Her voice remained low, but it was laced with a fury that was far more terrifying than any shout. "It is your job to know. It is your job to manage your airline's operations within my airport. Is it your airline's protocol to harass passengers? Is it your protocol to publicly humiliate a man based on what?" "His choice of sweatshirt." She gestured to the founder's wall. "And you didn't know who this man is?" "His name is on the sign above your head. For heaven's sake, it's on the sign outside on the highway." His face is right there, cast in eternal bronze, with a quote about inclusivity that you have just trampled all over. Each word was a precise surgical cut. Garrett visibly withered under the assault. I apologize, he stammered, turning desperately to Alistair. Dr. Finch. Sir. I am so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. A misjudgment. Alistair looked at him, his expression unreadable. You did make a mistake, Mr. Vance. Your mistake was not in failing to recognize me. My anonymity is a choice I often enjoy. Your mistake was in how you treated a person you assumed had no power. You saw a black man in a hoodie, and you saw a problem to be managed, not a person to be respected. You would not have treated the man in the bronze plaque this way. You should not have treated the man in the hoodie this way either. Recognition should not be a prerequisite for dignity. Isabel Sterling stepped forward, her decision made. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Hand me your airport access credentials. Garrett stared at her, uncomprehending. My badge. Your cedar badge. Now, she commanded. You are a guest in this facility, and your presence is no longer welcome. Your access to all secure and non-secure areas of Finch Donovan International is hereby revoked, effective immediately. I am placing a formal complaint with Ascend Air's corporate headquarters for gross misconduct and violation of our partner agreements. You will be escorted from the premises. She had already pulled out her phone and was speaking into it. Security to the main mezzanine. I have a trespasser to be removed. The finality of it was brutal. In the space of 10 minutes, Garrett Vance had gone from an arrogant manager, wielding his petty authority, to a trespassed employee, publicly stripped of his job and his dignity in the shadow of the very man he had wronged. He numbly unclipped his ID badge and handed it to Isabel, his hand shaking uncontrollably. As 2 airport security officers arrived, Isabel turned her back on him completely, her focus returning to Alistair. Alistair, my sincerest apologies. This never should have happened. Let me personally escort you to your gate. We'll get you on your way. Thank you, Isabel, Alistair said quietly. But perhaps I might take the next flight. I think there are a few things we need to discuss. His eyes met hers and she understood. This wasn't over. The firing of one foolish manager wasn't the solution. It was only the beginning. The problem was bigger than Garrett Vance. It was systemic. And Dr. Alistair Finch, the man who built the airport, was about to begin the necessary and long overdue renovation of its culture. The video, as expected, hit the internet like a lightning strike. The woman who filmed it, a freelance journalist named Karen Bass, who happened to be flying home, knew exactly what she had. She uploaded the 10-minute clip unedited, with a simple, devastating title, Ascend Air Manager Tries to Bar Founder of Airport from Boarding Flight. Within an hour, it had 100,000 views. By morning, it was in the millions. It was on every major news network, every blog, every social media feed. The story was irresistible. The perfect cinematic tale of hubris meeting a legacy it failed to recognize. Finch Donovan and Ascend Air fail trended globally for 48 straight hours. For Ascend Air, the fallout was catastrophic. Their stock, already fragile in a competitive market, tumbled over 30% in 2 days of trading, wiping out nearly $1 billion in market capitalization. Their corporate offices were inundated with furious calls and emails. Lifelong customers publicly shredded their loyalty cards on social media. Corporate accounts began to sever ties. The name Garrett Vance became synonymous with corporate bigotry and incompetence. The airline's initial response was a boilerplate PR statement about an isolated incident and an employee who has been terminated. It was received with derision. The public wasn't just angry at Garrett Vance. They were angry at the corporate culture that created him. This is where Dr. Alistair Finch and director Isabel Sterling made their move. They didn't just want an apology, they wanted fundamental change. They rejected Ascend Air's private offers of a quiet settlement. Instead, they held a joint press conference in the same mezzanine where the incident occurred, standing in front of the founder's wall. Alistair, now dressed in a sharp suit, but speaking with the same quiet authority, addressed the cameras. "This incident was not about me," he began. "I was fortunate enough to have a recourse that most do not. My face may be on a wall, but what about the faces of those who are not? What about the millions of travelers who are judged by the color of their skin, their clothes, their accent, or their name?" This was a symptom of a deeper illness, the illness of implicit bias which thrives in the absence of accountability. Isabel Sterling then laid out their terms. Ascend Air would not be let off the hook with a simple payout. If they wanted to continue operating out of Finch Donovan International, one of the nation's most profitable hubs, they would have to agree to a series of legally binding reforms. The Finch Donovan Accords, as the press dubbed them, were sweeping. Ascend Air would be required to fund an independent multi-million-dollar trust. This trust, overseen by a board that included Dr. Finch himself, would have two primary missions. First, it would develop and implement a new industry-leading mandatory bias and de-escalation training program for every single Ascend Air employee, from the CEO down to the baggage handlers. Second, the majority of the funds would be used to create the Gateway to the Skies Scholarship Fund, a program dedicated to providing education and career opportunities in aviation and aerospace for students from underprivileged and underrepresented communities. Ascend Air, backed into a corner with its brand in freefall, had no choice but to agree. It was a public and humbling capitulation. Meanwhile, the personal consequences for Garrett Vance were devastatingly complete. Fired and publicly shamed, he became a pariah in the aviation industry. No airline would touch him. He attempted to sue Ascend Air for wrongful termination, claiming he was a scapegoat, but the viral video was an insurmountable obstacle. His union declined to represent him. Drowning in legal fees and unable to find work, he was forced to sell his oversized suburban house. His wife, mortified by the public scandal, and his unrepentant, self-pitying attitude, left him. Within a year, Garrett Vance was a broken man, working a low-wage job at a regional distribution center, the crisp suit replaced by a faded polo shirt. He had lost everything, not because of one mistake, but because that mistake revealed the truth of his character. He had built his identity on a fragile foundation of petty authority, and when that was kicked out from under him, there was nothing left to stand on. His was a hard, precipitous fall, a direct consequence of a choice made in a moment of arrogant blindness at Gate B12. The system he thought he controlled had in the end ground him to dust. 2 years passed not as a quiet interlude, but as a period of profound and deliberate reconstruction. For Dr. Alistair Finch, the airport bearing his name had always been a living entity, and the incident with Garrett Vance had been its near-fatal heart attack. The aftermath was the slow, intensive, and ultimately life-saving rehabilitation. He arrived at the main terminal on a Tuesday morning, the sunlight refracting through the immense glass facade into 1,000 dancing diamonds on the polished floor. The air itself felt different, less frantic, more purposeful. He was flying to Chicago again, a trip that had become a cherished annual tradition. His granddaughter Maya, now a respected postdoctoral fellow in aeronautical engineering, was the keynote speaker at the North American Aerospace Innovation Symposium. Her success was a source of light and pride that seemed to fill every corner of his life. He walked towards the beacon course, an anonymous figure in a simple navy blue blazer and charcoal trousers. This time, however, his anonymity felt different. It was not the invisibility of being overlooked, but the quiet confidence of being part of a seamless whole. He watched the interactions around him with the keen eye of a designer checking his work. He saw an Ascend Air agent patiently using a translation app on her tablet to help a bewildered elderly Japanese couple, her smile never faltering. He saw a ground crew manager talking to his team, not with barks and orders, but with the collaborative respect of a coach. These were the small, vital signs of a healthier organism. He reached gate B12, the very same gate, and found a short, orderly line. When his turn came, he handed his phone and his new, recently renewed driver's license to the young agent. The agent, a man named Ben, with bright, attentive eyes, scanned the boarding pass. A small frown flickered across his face. "Dr. Finch," he said, his tone immediately apologetic. "It seems we have a small issue. The system has duplicated your seat assignment. My sincerest apologies for the computer error." Before Alistair could even respond, a woman approached from the service desk. She was in her early 30s with a sharp, professional demeanor and a name tag that read, "Gabriela Rios, Station Manager." Alistair noted her posture confident, but not arrogant, her presence calming rather than imposing. "Ben, what's the situation?" she asked in a low, clear voice. "A seat duplication for Dr. Finch, ma'am," Ben reported. "I was about to find him a new assignment." Gabriella turned to Alistair, her expression one of professional concern and respect. There was no flicker of suspicion, no condescending once-over. She saw a passenger with a problem that needed solving. "Dr. Finch, I am so sorry for this inconvenience," she said. "It's our mistake entirely. Please give me just one moment, and I will personally ensure you have a comfortable seat for your flight. Would you care for a coffee or some water while you wait for just a moment?" "That's very kind, but not necessary," Alistair said, a genuine warmth spreading through his chest. "Thank you, Miss Rios." She gave him a brief, brilliant smile and turned to her computer. Within 60 seconds, she had resolved the issue, moving another passenger to an equivalent seat and securing Alistair's original assignment. She printed a new boarding pass and walked around the counter to hand it to him personally. "Here you are, Dr. Finch," she said. "Again, my apologies for the error. I hope you have a wonderful flight to Chicago. We are very proud to have you flying with us today." As he walked toward the jet bridge, Gabriella's voice stopped him one last time. "Dr. Finch." He turned. "I just wanted to say," she said, a hint of something more personal in her voice, "thank you. I was a gate agent in Terminal C when the Accords were implemented. I was one of the first to go through the new leadership program. I am a station manager today because of it. So thank you." Alistair simply nodded, his heart too full to formulate an adequate response. He now understood. He was witnessing his own legacy not as a static monument, but as a dynamic, living force for positive change embodied in a young manager who saw service not as a burden, but as a purpose. On board the plane, settled into his window seat, he pulled a small tablet from his briefcase. He opened an email he had saved, one he reread often. It was from a young man named Samuel Jones, the inaugural recipient of the Gateway to the Skies Scholarship. "Dear Dr. Finch, The email began, "I'm writing this from my dorm room at Purdue, and I still can't quite believe it. When I was a kid growing up in Englewood, the planes flying over to Midway were just noise. They were a reminder of a world that didn't feel like it was for me. A world of travel, of engineering, of opportunity that was happening somewhere else to other people. My high school guidance counselor told me to focus on getting a trade, a good, steady job. He wasn't being mean. He just couldn't see a path from where I was to where I wanted to be. This scholarship wasn't just about the money, sir. It was a map. It showed me the path. Because of you, and because of what happened that day at the airport, I'm now studying to be the person who designs the planes, not just the person who watches them fly over. When I go home for the holidays and I hear a jet, it's not noise anymore. It's a promise. Thank you for giving that promise to me. I won't let you down." Alistair closed the email, a familiar tightness in his throat. The bitterness of his humiliation at the hands of Garrett Vance had long since faded, composted into the rich soil from which futures like Samuel's and Gabriella's were now growing. He thought of Chloe, the young gate agent from that day. She was now the director of in-house training for Ascend Air's entire domestic operation. He had attended one of her sessions, sitting unobserved in the back of the room. He watched her stand before a class of new recruits, young, diverse, eager faces. She had played a heavily blurred and audio-distorted clip of the incident. This company failed that day, Chloe told the class, her voice resonating with the conviction of experience. The manager in that video, he wasn't a monster. He was a man who confused authority with power. He was a man who let a small, ugly bias cloud his judgment until it became a Category 5 hurricane that destroyed his career and nearly crippled our airline. She paused, letting her words sink in. Every day you will face a choice. It won't be this dramatic. It will be small. It will be the choice to listen a little longer to a passenger with broken English. It will be the choice to see the person, not the scruffy clothes or the expensive suit. It will be the choice to de-escalate, not dominate. Your job is not to enforce rules. Your job is to connect people. The rules are just the tools to do that safely. Never forget that. Never let the tool become more important than the task. The memory filled Alistair with a quiet pride. Chloe had transformed her moment of frightened helplessness into a lifetime of empowerment for others. The plane began its gentle ascent, and soon the city spread out beneath him. He looked down, not at a grid of streets and buildings, but at a network of lives, millions of them all interconnected. The airport was a nexus point, a heart-pumping people and their stories, their hopes and their dreams through the arteries of the sky. He had designed the physical structure, but the events of 2 years ago had forced him to help redesign its soul. 2 days later, Alistair sat in the third row of a vast auditorium at the McCormick Place Convention Center in Chicago. The room was filled with the brightest minds in aerospace Nobel laureates, CEOs of tech giants, lead engineers from NASA and SpaceX. And on the stage at the podium was Maya. She looked poised and brilliant, a perfect fusion of his late wife's fiery spirit and his own methodical intellect. The title of her keynote was Structural Integrity and Systemic Redundancy in Hypersonic Propulsion. It was a deeply technical topic, but the way she spoke about it was pure poetry. "We design systems to withstand failure," she said, her voice clear and confident, as she gestured to a complex diagram on the screen behind her. "We build in redundancies. If one component fails, another takes over. We stress test our designs against every conceivable variable: heat, pressure, fatigue. A system is only as strong as its ability to function under duress, to handle the unexpected, to accommodate for error. She paused and looked out at the audience, her eyes seeming to find his. But what is true for a hypersonic engine is also true for the human systems we build around our technology. An organization, an industry, a society, these are also structures, and they too must be designed with a kind of systemic redundancy. A redundancy against our own worst impulses, against our biases, against our failures of imagination. A truly robust system doesn't just work for the people it expects to see. It must work for everyone. Its integrity is measured not by how it performs under ideal conditions, but by how it treats the outlier, the unexpected variable, the person it wasn't programmed to recognize. Alistair felt tears well in his eyes. She had taken his life's work, the technical and the ethical, and woven them together into a single, seamless philosophy. She was his legacy, more alive and more brilliant than any airport or bronze plaque. When her speech concluded, the auditorium erupted in a thunderous standing ovation. Alistair stood with them, clapping until his hands were sore, his face beaming with a pride so immense it felt like it could lift him from the floor. Later that evening, they sat at a quiet restaurant overlooking the Chicago River. The city lights glittered like a fallen constellation. "Your speech, Maya," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "It was magnificent." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I was just channeling my grandfather. Everything I said I learned from you, not just from the textbooks you gave me, but from how you live, from what you did 2 years ago." "All I did was refuse to move," he said with a wry smile. "No, Grandpa," she said, her expression serious. "You did more than that. You held a mirror up to a broken system. You forced it to see its own reflection. You could have taken a settlement and walked away. But you stayed. You helped rebuild it. You turned a moment of personal indignity into a legacy of institutional dignity. That's what I was talking about up there. That is structural integrity." He looked at his granddaughter, this brilliant, compassionate, formidable woman. He had spent his life designing machines that could soar above the clouds. But his greatest achievement, he realized in that moment, was the family he had built, the values he had passed down, and the granddaughter who was now teaching the world how to build better, more humane systems. He had once worried that his legacy was tied to concrete and steel. But as he looked at Maya, he knew his real legacy was in the strength of her character, in the opportunity afforded to Samuel Jones, in the confidence of Gabriela Rios, and in the wisdom of Chloe's training sessions. He hadn't just built an airport. He had, by necessity, helped to build a better community within it. The work was never truly finished, but as he flew home the next day, looking down at the world from 30,000 feet, Dr. Alistair Finch felt a profound and lasting sense of peace. The house was in order. 6 months after Maya's triumphant speech in Chicago, winter had settled over the city. A cold, persistent drizzle fell from a pewter-gray sky, giving the lights inside Finch Donovan International an even warmer, more welcoming glow. Alistair was not traveling today. He was in the arrivals hall of the international terminal, waiting for an old friend and colleague, a professor from the University of Nairobi, to arrive for a collaborative research project. The atmosphere here was different from the departures concourse. It was a place of reunion and relief, filled with families holding welcome signs, lovers embracing, and the happy chaos of retrieved luggage. Alistair stood near a coffee kiosk, sipping a black Americano, content to be an observer. He found a deep satisfaction in watching the airport function as a place of connection, a physical manifestation of the global community he had always hoped to serve. He was watching a young girl press her face against the glass, squealing with delight as she spotted her grandparents, when a movement to his left caught his eye. It was a service cart, laden with boxes of coffee cups and sleeves, being pushed by a man in a plain grey uniform belonging to a third-party logistics contractor. The man moved with a weary slowness. His shoulders stooped, his gaze fixed on the floor in front of him. There was an air of profound defeat about him, the posture of a man trying to make himself as small and invisible as possible. Alistair's mind, trained over a lifetime to recognize patterns and details, registered the man's features. The thinning hair, the set of the jaw, the shape of his hands. It was Garrett Vance. The change was staggering. The crisply tailored suit was gone, replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting uniform. The arrogant, puffed-up posture had collapsed into a hollowed-out slouch. The face once flushed with authority and condescension was now pale gaunt and etched with the lines of chronic stress and humiliation. He looked 10 years older and infinitely smaller. Alistair felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was no triumph, no gloating sense of victory. Instead, he felt a surprising and unwelcome pang of pity. He watched as Garrett maneuvered the heavy cart toward the kiosk. The barista, a young woman with pink-streaked hair, didn't even look up from her phone. "Refills here," Garrett mumbled his voice, a dull monotone, a ghost of the sharp, commanding tone Alistair remembered. "Just stack 'em by the wall," the barista said, waving a dismissive hand without making eye contact. "I'll get to 'em later." Garrett did as he was told, his movements clumsy with fatigue. He began unloading the boxes, his breath fogging in the cool air. He was just another faceless drone in the vast ecosystem of the airport, treated with the same casual indifference he had once weaponized against others. Alistair remembered his own words from that day on the mezzanine. Your mistake was in how you treated a person you assumed had no power. Garrett was now living that reality every single day. For a moment, Alistair considered simply turning and walking away. This was not his concern anymore. The man had faced the consequences of his actions. Justice had been served. But then he looked at the pathetic figure of Garrett Vance, a man so thoroughly broken by his public shaming, and he saw not a villain, but a tragic human echo. The principles he and Maya had spoken of building better, more humane systems, felt hollow if they didn't extend to the fallen, to the very people who proved why those systems were necessary. Making a decision, Alistair walked toward the kiosk. Garrett was bent over, lifting the last box, his back to the counter. Alistair stood there, waiting. When Garrett finally straightened up, wiping a weary hand across his brow, he saw Alistair standing just a few feet away, holding an empty coffee cup. The recognition was instantaneous and devastating. Every trace of color drained from Garrett's face, replaced by a deathly pallor. His eyes widened in pure animal panic. He looked like a ghost who had just seen a living man. He physically recoiled, stumbling back against the cart, causing a sleeve of cups to tumble to the floor. His first instinct was to flee, to disappear, but he was cornered between the cart, the wall, and the man who was the architect of both the building and his ruin. Dr. Finch, he stammered, his voice cracking. He couldn't meet Alistair's eyes, his gaze darting around, frantically, as if seeking an escape route that didn't exist. Alistair's expression was unreadable. He gave no sign of anger or judgment. He simply held out his empty cup. "I was hoping to get a refill." The request was so mundane, so utterly normal, that it seemed to short-circuit Garrett's panic. He stared at the cup, then at Alistair's calm face, completely bewildered. He was no longer working the counter. He was a stocker. But in his panicked state, he fumbled for a response. I'm not. It's all right, Alistair said, his voice quiet and even. He placed the empty cup on the counter and looked at Garrett. Truly looked at him for the first time. He didn't see a manager or a pariah. He saw a man who had lost his way. I did not expect to see you here, Mr. Vance, Alistair said. Not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. Garrett finally managed to lift his gaze from the floor. He saw no malice in Alistair's eyes, no hint of triumphalism. He saw only a quiet, unnerving neutrality. And that more than anything broke the last of his defenses. They took everything, Garrett whispered, his voice ragged with a grief he had likely never shown to anyone. The job, the pension, my house, my wife. She left. Said she couldn't stand the shame. He let out a dry, rattling sob. I have this job. It's all I could get. Nobody else would, you know. He finally looked directly at Alistair, his eyes swimming with unshed tears. You were right, what you said. About power. When you don't have any, people don't even see you. You're just in the way. The raw, painful confession hung in the air between them. This was the apology Garrett couldn't give when he had something left to lose. It was the sound of a man who had hit the very bottom and found only hard, painful truths waiting for him. Alistair listened without interruption. When Garrett fell silent, hollowed out by his own confession, Alistair spoke. The price for your actions was high, Mr. Vance. I take no pleasure in that, he said softly. But that price has been paid. The man who was fired from Ascend Air, the man who lost his house, that man's story is over. The question is, what story does the man standing here today want to write for himself? Garrett stared uncomprehending. He had expected anger, or at the very least a cold and righteous dismissal. He had not expected a question about his future. He had not expected grace. Alistair reached into his wallet, pulled out a $20 bill and placed it on the counter. For my coffee and for yours, he said. He then met Garrett's gaze one last time. A legacy is not just what we build, Mr. Vance. It is also what we choose to rebuild. I wish you well in your reconstruction. And with that, Dr. Alistair Finch turned and walked away, heading toward the gate where his friend's flight was now arriving. He did not look back. He left Garrett Vance standing by the service cart, staring at the $20 bill. The unexpected kindness of it, more staggering than any punishment. For the first time in 2 years, Garrett Vance had been seen not as a caricature of failure, but simply as a man. It was not forgiveness. It was not a job offer. It was something far more fundamental. It was a moment of dignity, offered freely by the person who had every right to withhold it. As Alistair embraced his old friend, he felt a final, quiet click of resolution within him. The great work of his life had been about creating systems that connected people, and he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that the most important connections are not built of steel and glass, but of the small, difficult, and profoundly human acts of grace. The story of Dr. Alistair Finch is a powerful reminder that dignity is not a privilege to be granted, but a right to be recognized. It shows how one man's quiet refusal to be dismissed ignited a movement that reshaped an entire industry. What happened to Garrett Vance wasn't just a twist of fate. It was the inevitable outcome when arrogance collides with a legacy built on integrity. This story asks us all to look closer at the people around us, at the systems we participate in, and at the inscriptions on the walls we might otherwise ignore. What would you have done if you were a passenger in that line? What does this story say about power and prejudice in our own lives? We believe these are conversations worth having. If this story moved you, please give this video a like to help it reach more people. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more true stories that challenge our perspectives and inspire change. Join the conversation in the comments below.